The wind howled across the open plains like a living creature, pushing thick waves of snow across the small wooden cabin. Mara Collins pressed her back against the door to keep it from rattling too hard. The storm outside was growing stronger by the minute, and every gust made the walls shiver. She wrapped her thin shawl around herself and tried to catch her breath. Her body was still weak from giving birth only days ago. She had barely slept since, and her muscles felt heavy all the time. Her newborn twins lay in a basket near the fire. She had wrapped them in the softest blankets she owned. But even that felt like too little against the bitter cold sneaking in through every crack of the cabin. The babies made small sounds, soft cries that broke her heart. She knelt beside them, brushing her fingers over their cheeks. Their faces were red, their eyes squeezed shut from the cold. She whispered to them, trying to sound calm even though fear pressed tight against her chest. "It's all right," she murmured. "Mama's here. I won't let anything happen to you." But she knew she was lying to herself. She had no idea how she would keep them safe. She tried to build the fire higher, but the woodpile was low, too low. She only had a few sticks left, not enough to last the night. Her husband's brother, Daniel, had promised to bring more firewood and help her during the storm. After all, her husband had been his own blood. And Daniel had sworn he would take care of her after the accident that took her husband's life. Instead, earlier that morning, when she was too weak to stand for long, he had taken the horse, half of the food, and the rifle. He didn't look her in the eye when he left. He mumbled something about the storm being too dangerous and said he needed to get back to town. She asked him to wait for 1 hour until she could feed the babies and prepare water. But he didn't listen. He climbed on the horse and disappeared into the white wind, leaving her alone with 2 newborns and hardly any supplies. She had tried not to panic. She told herself he would return by sunset. But sunset had come and gone, and now darkness covered the land. Only the faint glow of the weak fire lit the cabin. Mara sat on the floor near the fireplace, trying to keep both herself and the babies close to the warmth. Her hands trembled as she held them. She could feel her strength slipping away with every passing moment. She thought back to the days before her husband died. John had been a strong man, full of laughter, full of plans. They had traveled west to build a new life, to raise a family on land they hoped would one day belong to their children. But everything had changed the day he fell from the wagon on a rocky trail. His injury had taken him quickly. Mara still remembered holding his hand, promising him she would stay strong, promising she would bring their children into the world safely. She never imagined she would be facing motherhood alone. In a blizzard, with no one but 2 tiny babies depending on her. Another gust slammed against the cabin, and snowflakes burst through the cracks like white dust. She tightened her shawl and checked the windows, pushing rags against the gaps. Her fingers felt numb. She could hardly feel the wood when she picked up the last fire log. "No, not yet," she whispered to herself. Not until the last moment. She wanted to save it for when the baby's crying grew desperate, not for her own comfort. She would freeze before she let her children freeze. She moved back to the basket and lifted one of the twins, the smaller one, pressing the baby against her chest. The warmth of the little body made her eyes sting with tears. She rocked gently, humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing. The familiar notes steadied her, but only for a little while. The storm outside roared with such force it felt like the whole world was shaking. Her breath fogged in front of her face. The fire crackled weakly. The twins began to cry again, their tiny voices thin and tired. Mara tried to nurse them, but her body was too weak, too cold. She apologized softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. The fear crept deeper into her heart. She looked around the cabin, just 4 walls, a leaky roof, and a floor covered with cold earth. The small window was frosted over, and she could barely see the storm outside. But she could hear it. She could feel it. The blizzard felt endless. Her thoughts grew dim for a moment. as if the cold was pulling her down. She blinked hard, trying to stay awake. She needed to stay awake. She couldn't let her babies be alone. Not even for a moment. She wrapped them both in her arms and curled her body around them, but her strength was failing. She could feel it like sand slipping through her fingers. She laid her head against the side of the basket and closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. To rest. Then something sharp hit the cabin wall, maybe a falling branch or something thrown by the wind. It startled her awake. She gasped, clutching the babies tighter. The sudden movement sent pain through her body, but she forced herself to sit up straight. Her heart pounded. She listened carefully, wondering if someone might be outside, but she heard nothing except the storm. She waited, hoping for a sound, hoofbeats, a voice, anything, but the planes were silent. She thought of Daniel again. Even if he had tried to return, he would not make it through this storm. She also knew, deep in her heart, that he hadn't planned to come back at all. The look in his eyes before he rode away was not the look of a man who planned to help. It was the look of a man who wanted to be free from responsibility. She felt a bitter ache in her chest at the memory. Her body began to shiver uncontrollably. She rubbed her hands together and breathed warm air onto her fingers. She didn't want to cry, but tears came anyway. She felt so tired, so scared, so alone. Yet she refused to give up. She thought of her husband again, his smile, his warm hands. The way he used to lift her easily and laugh when she tried to act tough. She imagined him standing beside her now, telling her to stay strong, telling her to hold on. She whispered to him softly, "I'm trying, John. I'm doing everything I can. Please don't let the babies suffer." The twins whimpered again, and she kissed their heads. The fire suddenly flickered and dimmed to almost nothing. She stared at it, panic rising. She needed to add the last log now, or the fire would die completely. Her hands were shaking as she placed the log in the fireplace. The flame caught slowly, and the glow brightened the room just enough to push the darkness back a little. It wasn't much, but it was something. She leaned back against the wall, hugging her babies, trying to draw in whatever warmth she could. Her eyelids felt heavy, but she fought the urge to sleep. Sleeping meant danger. Sleeping meant cold winning. Sleeping meant the babies might wake alone. She forced her eyes open, focusing on small details, the crack in the wood floor, the pattern of the blankets, the tiny fingers of her children. She whispered stories to them. Simple little tales about their father, about the days before the storm, about spring flowers and warm sunshine. Her voice was weak, but she kept talking to keep herself awake. But the storm raged on. Hours seemed to pass, though she could not tell if it was truly hours or just minutes. Time felt strange and slippery. Her head dipped forward as exhaustion weighed on her. She shook herself awake again and again. Her breathing grew shallow. Her fingers went numb. The room blurred at the edges. She felt a strange calm for a moment, like sinking into water. She knew this feeling. She had felt it once before during a fever. It was the feeling of her body giving up. She clutched her babies tighter, trying to fight it, trying to stay on the surface. But the darkness pushed closer. The fire dimmed again. Her head lowered. Her body slumped. And finally, she could fight no more. With her last bit of awareness, she whispered to her children, "I'm here. I'm right here." Then her eyes closed, and she went still. The twins pressed safely against her chest as the storm screamed outside. Unseen by her, miles away, a Comanche hunter halted in the blizzard, his sharp eyes catching a faint trail in the snow, weak footprints leading toward the cabin. Help was on its way. The storm had not frightened Tahan at first. He had grown up on these plains, learning from childhood how to read snow, wind, and sky. But even he knew this blizzard was stronger than most. The wind whipped against his face with sharp force, and the snow blew sideways, like white arrows. Still, he pressed forward, one steady step after another, leading his horse carefully through the deepening drifts. He had been out since morning, tracking elk trails that usually ran along the river. But the storm had swept in early. The sky had darkened faster than he expected, and the wind changed direction, warning him to turn back toward his people's winter camp. He would have done so immediately, if not for something strange he noticed in the snow just before the storm grew too heavy to see tracks that did not belong to animals. They were footprints, faint, uneven, and almost erased by the wind, but human, and not the strong steps of a healthy man. They dragged on one side, as if the person had been tired or injured. Another detail made Tehan stop. He could see the imprint of a boot, but also something smaller, like the soft mark of a cloth-wrapped foot. He frowned at that. A settler, maybe, but why would anyone walk toward the open plains during a storm? Something felt wrong. He followed the tracks, moving slowly to keep them in sight before the wind wiped them away completely. His horse snorted nervously, but Tehan calmed it with a quiet voice and kept going. After a while, the shape of a cabin appeared in the distance, barely visible through the thick snow. The sight made him even more alert. He had passed this area before, long ago. A settler family had once lived here, a man and a woman. He remembered seeing smoke from the chimney months ago, when the weather was warmer. But now the cabin looked half buried in snow, the roof weighed down, and not a single flame or light came from inside. He approached slowly, listening for sounds. The storm roared, but underneath that, there was silence. Too much silence. A lived-in cabin should have something crying, movement, fire cracking, anything. But this place felt still, almost abandoned. He tied his horse near the wall, shielding it from the wind, then approached the door. The bottom corner of the door had broken loose, probably from the storm. Snow pushed through the gap in small piles. Tehan pressed his hand against the wood. It was icy cold. That alone made him worry. A warm cabin always carried heat even to the outside. This one felt dead. He knocked once, out of respect, though he doubted anyone would answer. The wind swallowed the sound before it could truly echo. He waited a few seconds. Nothing. Finally, he pushed the door open. Snow had blown across the floor, making the inside almost as cold as the outside. But he did not take more than 2 steps before he stopped sharply. His eyes narrowed. There, on the floor near the fire pit, lay a woman still, pale, her hair tangled with frost. She was curled around 2 tiny bundles, holding them close with the last strength she must have had. At first, he feared all 3 were gone. The woman's face held no color, and she was so still that she looked carved from stone. But then he heard it, the soft, weak sound of an infant's cry. Tehan's heart kicked fast. He moved quickly but gently, kneeling beside them. His fingers were trained to check for life the way Comanche healers taught. He touched the babies first. They were alive, cold as snow, but alive. Their small bodies trembled under the blankets. He lifted one carefully, the tiniest and weakest one. The little face scrunched, and a soft cry escaped. He wrapped the baby instantly inside his warm buffalo robe, then picked up the second child and did the same. Only then did he check the mother. Her breath was shallow, almost invisible, but it was there, faint, fragile. She had fought the cold as long as she could, but her body was failing. Tehan looked around the cabin. There was almost no wood left. The fire pit held only ashes. There was no food in sight except a small bag of cornmeal. He understood fully now the woman had been abandoned in the storm. She had not chosen to be alone. Someone had left her to face the blizzard without help. Anger flickered in his chest for a moment. Not at her, but at whoever had done this. He whispered softly, "You are strong to have lived this long." He lifted her gently, adjusting her weight over his shoulder. She was light, too light, as if she had not eaten well in days. Then he took both babies, wrapped tightly inside his robe, and settled them against his chest. Their warmth pressed against him, faint but real. He knew he could not stay in the cabin. Even if he built a fire, the roof might collapse under the weight of snow. And with so little wood, the fire would die before long. They needed shelter, real shelter, quickly. The Comanche winter camp was far, but not impossible to reach. He had traveled long distances in storms before. His horse was strong and used to harsh weather. If he could make it to the river bend, the path from there would lead him directly to camp. He stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him to keep the worst of the storm from destroying the cabin. His horse stamped the ground, nervous, but calmed when he approached. He placed the babies inside his buffalo robe, securing them close to his chest so they would feel his body heat. The woman he placed carefully across the saddle, tying her with rope so she would not slip. Before mounting, he paused again. Snow blew so hard, it nearly erased his tracks instantly. The world looked like a sea of white, but he knew the land. He knew the direction, even when the sky hid its face. He whispered a short prayer to guide their path. Then he urged the horse forward, pushing into the storm. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. The wind roared so fiercely that even breathing felt like a battle. Snow hit his face like countless needles. He could barely see more than a few feet ahead. But Tahan did not slow down. He checked the babies often, pressing a hand to each tiny back to ensure they still moved, still breathed. Each time he felt the faint rise and fall of their breath, he pushed forward with renewed strength. The woman remained unconscious, slumped over the horse's neck. Her hair whipped in the wind, and her lips were pale. But she was alive. That was enough. A few times, Tahan shouted into the storm to make sure the horse stayed calm. The animal fought bravely, lifting its legs through deep snow, carrying the weight of all three people. Tahan felt gratitude toward the faithful creature. At last, after what felt like endless miles, the land dipped slightly. The river bend was close. He recognized the curve of the hills, even under the snow. Relief washed through him. Once he reached the bend, the wind grew slightly weaker. The land formed a natural shield. Still, the air was freezing, and the babies cried softly, their tiny voices muffled inside the robe. "It's all right," he whispered to them. "Stay awake, stay warm, we are close." Soon, faint shapes appeared ahead, tall poles, strong shadows moving through the snow. The Comanche camp. A guard spotted him first and shouted to others. Figures rushed forward, men and women. They took the woman from the horse and carried her into the nearest warm lodge. A group of women quickly took the babies from Tahan and wrapped them in fresh furs, their hands moving fast with practiced care. Warmth finally touched Tahan's frozen skin as he entered the lodge. The fire inside glowed bright, the air smelled of herbs and smoke, and the sound of many voices filled the space. A healer knelt beside the woman at once, checking her breath, her hands, her eyes. Others warmed water, brought blankets, and offered soft food for the babies. There was no panic, only calm, steady movement, the kind that came from a people used to helping one another in harsh winters. Tahan stayed near, watching with focus. Snow melted from his clothes onto the floor, but he didn't move or sit. His eyes stayed on the woman and the twins, making sure they were kept warm and safe. After a long while, one of the elder women turned to him. "You brought them in time," she said softly. "Another hour, and the cold would have taken them." Tahan nodded once, his jaw tight. "She fought as long as she could." The elder touched his arm gently. "Rest now. You have done enough for one night." But he didn't rest yet. He stood beside the fire a bit longer, listening to the small sounds of the babies, watching the slow rise and fall of the woman's breath as warmth returned to her pale face. The storm still roared outside, but inside the lodge, life was returning. And Tahan knew, deep in his heart, that this night had changed something not just for the woman and her children, but for himself too, though he could not yet understand how. Warm air surrounded Mara long before she understood where she was. At first, she felt only heat on her cheeks, a soft blanket over her legs, and the faint smell of smoke mixed with herbs. She tried to open her eyes, but they were heavy. Her body felt weak, almost weightless. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. The last thing she remembered was the storm, the freezing air, and holding her babies close as darkness took her. She forced her eyes open, blinking slowly. A warm glow filled the space around her. She was inside a round lodge, a structure built with wooden poles and covered with hides. A fire burned in the middle, its flames dancing gently and sending soft light across the walls. Around the edges of the lodge were blankets, baskets, clay pots, and drying herbs hanging from the beams. For several seconds, she lay still, trying to understand. Then, her heart raced. Her babies. She sat up too fast, her head spinning. Her vision blurred, and she nearly fell back. But a steady hand touched her shoulder, guiding her gently. "You are safe," a soft voice said. "Do not stand too quickly. Your strength has not returned yet." Mara looked up. A Comanche woman with kind eyes sat beside her. The woman wrapped a warm fur around Mara's shoulders and helped her lean back against a cushion. My babies," Mara whispered. Her voice cracked. The woman smiled gently and gestured to the other side of the lodge. Two Comanche women were sitting near the fire, each holding one of Mara's twins. The babies were wrapped in thick fur robes, their small faces warm and pink. One woman was gently rocking a twin while humming a soft, soothing song. The other woman held the second baby close to her chest, letting the infant feed peacefully. Tears filled Mara's eyes so quickly that she pressed her hand to her mouth to hold in a sob. "They are safe," the kind woman said. "They were very cold when they came. But they are strong." Mara's body sagged with relief, her hands trembling as she watched her babies. She wiped her eyes quickly, trying not to cry too hard. She didn't want to seem weak or ungrateful. The woman handed her a wooden cup filled with warm broth. Mara tried to hold it steady, but her hands shook too much. The woman helped guide the cup to her lips. The broth was simple, but warm and nourishing. It soothed her throat and spread warmth through her chest. After a few sips, Mara finally found the strength to speak. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't think we would live." The woman nodded slowly. "The storm was cruel, but Tahan found you in time." Mara repeated the name in her mind. Tahan. She had heard that name before among settlers talking about nearby tribes. Some had spoken with fear, others with respect, but she had never seen a Comanche up close until now. Where is he?" she asked softly. The woman pointed toward the entrance of the lodge. A shadow moved there, then stepped inside. A tall, strong man ducked slightly as he entered. Snowflakes clung to his hair and shoulders, and he brushed them off with calm movements. His face was serious but gentle, and he carried himself with quiet confidence. "Tahan." He stepped closer, his dark eyes observing Mara closely, making sure she was truly awake and aware. When he saw her looking at him, he gave a small, respectful nod. "You have woken," he said, his voice low and steady. "Good." Mara swallowed hard, emotion tightening her throat. Tahan shook his head slightly. The storm was fierce. Anyone would have helped. But Mara knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would ride into a blizzard. Not everyone would risk their life to save strangers, especially settlers. But she could see, Tahan wasn't someone who sought praise. He had acted because he believed it was right. She looked down at her trembling hands, trying to gather her thoughts. "Thank you," she whispered again, the words small but full of meaning. He nodded once more, accepting her gratitude quietly. The elder woman who had been holding her daughter brought the baby to Mara. "She is warm now," the woman said kindly. "You may hold her." Mara reached out with trembling arms, and the woman helped place the tiny girl against her chest. The baby made a soft sound, curling her fingers around Mara's shawl. Tears ran freely down Mara's face, and she held her daughter close for a long moment before looking at her son. The second woman stood and placed the boy gently into Mara's free arm. The twins, warm and well-fed, relaxed against her as if they finally felt safe. Mara whispered to them softly, kissing their foreheads again and again, unable to stop. She felt a weight lift from her heart, a crushing fear melting away. For the first time since the blizzard began, she allowed herself to breathe fully. Tahan watched her with quiet understanding. He didn't interrupt. He didn't speak. He simply stood nearby, making sure the fire stayed strong and the lodge remained warm. His presence felt steady and warm, like another protective wall around her and the babies. Hours passed gently in the lodge. The women checked on Mara often, giving her warm food, water, and soft herbs to help her body regain strength. They spoke to her with calm, friendly voices, welcoming her as if she were one of their own. Their kindness eased the fear in her heart. As the storm weakened outside, more members of the tribe visited the lodge. Some brought extra blankets, others brought soft hides for bedding. A few curious children peeked in quietly, fascinated by the tiny babies. Mara found herself smiling shyly at their wide eyes and gentle whispers. At one point, Tahan sat near the fire and took one of the twins when the baby fussed. He lifted the infant with surprising gentleness for such a strong man. The baby settled quickly, soothed by his calm presence. "You are good with them," Mara said softly, surprised to hear her own voice sound almost peaceful. Tahan shrugged lightly. "My sister had many children. I helped when I was younger." Mara watched him for a moment. He held the baby with natural ease, his hands steady, his expression soft. She felt gratitude rise inside her again, but also something else. Something warmer. Something like admiration. He looked up and met her eyes. For a moment, their gazes held. She quickly looked away, embarrassed, her cheeks warm. She reminded herself that she was a stranger here. She was a guest. She could not expect anything more than kindness, yet the kindness she received was deeper, gentler, and more genuine than anything she had known from her husband's family. As the day passed, Mara learned simple words from the women, words for water, warm, thank you. They laughed softly when she pronounced them wrong, but not unkindly. They taught her slowly, patiently. In the evening, when the storm finally calmed, Tahan entered the lodge again after checking the camp's horses. He had snow in his hair and cold on his skin, but he looked relieved to see Mara awake and sitting upright. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Weak," she admitted. "But better than before." "Weak. Weak. You will get stronger," he said. "My people will help." Mara nodded, holding her sleeping twins close. She felt the weight of his words, the sincerity in them. She felt safe here, far safer than she had felt in her own cabin. She watched Tahan carefully as he sat near the fire. Something about him felt steady, protective, and calm. She didn't realize she was staring, until he glanced at her again. She quickly shifted her eyes, embarrassed. But Tahan wasn't offended. His voice softened. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, you will feel even stronger." Mara nodded slowly. She laid down on the soft bedding the women had prepared and pulled her twins close beside her. As she closed her eyes, she heard the faint sounds of the tribe outside voices. Quiet laughter. The crackle of distant fires. She thought about how she had been left to freeze, how she had almost given up hope, and how this tribe, these strangers, had brought her and her children back to life. Her last thought before sleep took her was simple and full of wonder. She was not alone anymore. And Tahan had changed everything. Morning light touched the lodge softly, slipping in through the small gaps near the roof. Mara woke slowly, blinking as the warmth of the fire and the quiet crackle of burning wood welcomed her into the new day. For a moment, she lay still, listening. The twins slept beside her, wrapped in soft furs, their tiny breaths steady and peaceful. The simple rise and fall of their little chests filled her heart with relief. She stretched carefully, surprised to feel a bit of strength returning to her body. Her muscles still ached, but the deep cold that had once wrapped around her bones was gone. She sat up slowly, making sure the babies stayed warm, and looked around the lodge. It felt familiar now, not like home, but like a place where she belonged for the moment. Outside, she could hear voices, the laughter of children, the neighing of horses, and the calm rhythm of village life starting with the morning. The storm had passed overnight, leaving a bright, clean world of white snow and soft sunlight. The blizzard that had almost taken her life now looked gentle from inside the warm lodge. The door covering lifted, and a woman stepped inside carrying a bowl of warm porridge. She smiled at Mara, placed the bowl near her, and gestured kindly for her to eat. Mara gave a grateful nod. The food was simple but comforting, each warm spoonful melting against her tongue and giving her body new strength. Not long after, Tahan entered. He paused near the door, brushing off snow, then stepped into the circle of firelight. Mara looked at him and felt a small, unexpected warmth spread across her chest. He looked different in daylight. She could see him more clearly, the strength in his shoulders, the scars on his hands, the calm, steady expression that seemed to belong to someone who carried many responsibilities. "You look better," he said quietly, his voice carrying a soft note of relief. "I feel better," Mara replied. Her voice was still weak, but it held more confidence than the day before. "Thanks to all of you." Tahan gave a small nod. "My people are glad you and the little ones are safe." Mara glanced down at her twins. "They're alive because of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't ever forget that." He said nothing for a moment. He simply looked at her with a warm, steady gaze, then lowered himself to sit beside the fire. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It felt calm, steady, like something gentle was growing there. Later in the morning, one of the elder women entered and set down more food and herbs. She sat beside Mara and gently touched her hand. "We must talk," the elder said kindly. "When you are ready." Mara's heart tightened. She knew this moment would come. She had survived the storm, but now she had to decide her future. The elder woman's eyes were filled with understanding, not pressure. Mara nodded slowly. "I'm ready," she whispered. The elder took a deep breath. "You are safe here. You and your children are welcome among us. But you may wish to return to your people. If you choose to go back, we will help you travel. If you choose to stay, we will make a place for you." Mara looked down at her hands. Her heart beat faster. The decision felt heavy, larger than anything she had faced before. Returning to the settlement meant returning to the life she had known, but that life no longer existed. Her husband was gone. Her brother-in-law had taken her horse, her food, and her hope, and he had no intention of ever helping her again. If she returned, she would be alone again, struggling to survive with 2 newborns and no support. But staying meant living with the Comanche. She had been taught to fear them, to see them as enemies. Yet everything she had seen here was kindness, patience, and warmth. They had taken her in when her own kin had abandoned her. They fed her children. They warmed her. They treated her with respect and gentle care. Her eyes moved to Tahan, who sat quietly as she thought. His expression revealed nothing, but she sensed his attention on her decision. The elder spoke softly. "No one will force your path. You choose the road that feels true." Mara nodded slowly. She looked at her babies alive and warm in her arms. She thought of the cold cabin, the storm, the loneliness she had felt for months, and the emptiness that had followed her since her husband's death. Then she looked at the people around her, the women who helped her, the young girls who smiled at her twins, and Tahan, whose courage had saved her, and whose quiet presence now steadied her heart. The choice suddenly felt clear. "I want to stay," Mara whispered. If your people will have me." The elder smiled, a deep, warm smile of acceptance. "You are already part of us. You brought life and courage into our lodge. You and your children are welcome." A soft cheer rose from the women nearby. Even the children outside peeked into the lodge with excited smiles. Mara's heart felt lighter than it had since the day she buried her husband. She smiled through her tears, hugging her twins close. Tahan rose to his feet slowly. He didn't speak at first, but the quiet shine in his eyes showed something like relief, maybe even happiness. "You have chosen a strong path," he said softly. "You will not be alone here." Mara met his eyes. "I haven't felt alone since you found us," she said, before she could stop herself. Tahan's expression softened. He looked down, almost shyly, before offering a small, warm smile. Days turned into weeks. Mara grew stronger each day, learning routines of the camp. The women taught her how to prepare food, using herbs and dried meat. Children brought small gifts, painted beads, feathers, little wooden toys for her twins. The men treated her with respect, always giving space and offering help without asking for anything in return. And Tahan visited often. Sometimes he brought wood for her lodge. Sometimes he sat by the fire, helping craft tiny cradle boards for the twins. Sometimes he simply talked about the stars, about hunting trails, about stories from their ancestors. Mara listened, interested in every word. Something gentle grew between them, something built slowly on trust rather than fear. One bright morning in early spring, Mara stood outside the lodge with the twins sleeping on a blanket near her feet. She watched the sun rise over the horizon, spreading gold across the snowy ground. She breathed in the cold air and felt peace in her heart. Tahan approached quietly, carrying a handmade cradleboard wrapped in soft leather. The edges were decorated with small beads in patterns of blue and white. "For your son," he said softly. "He grows stronger. He will need this soon." Mara touched the cradleboard with trembling fingers. It was beautiful, made with care and skill. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." He nodded, then looked down at her twins and smiled. His eyes softened in a way she had seen more often lately. "You have found a place here," he said gently. "My people like you. The children love the little ones." Mara looked at him with quiet gratitude. "I didn't expect to find safety again," she said. "But your people gave it freely." He held her gaze for a long moment. Something unspoken passed between them. Something warm, hopeful, gentle. He cleared his throat softly. "In time," he said carefully, "you will make your home here completely. And if you ever need someone to stand with you, you will not need to look far." Mara's heart fluttered softly. She looked down, her cheeks warm, then looked back up with a shy smile. "I know," she whispered. "You've already stood with us once." Tahan's smile deepened small, but full of quiet meaning. As the sun rose higher, Mara watched the light fall across the camp. Children ran through the snow. Women prepared hides. Men worked with horses, and Tahan stood beside her, steady and warm. She had once believed the blizzard would be her end. But instead, it became the beginning of a new life, one filled with safety, kindness, and the promise of something deeper. She tightened her shawl around her shoulders, looked at her twins sleeping peacefully, and whispered a silent prayer of thanks. She was not abandoned. She was found. And in the heart of a people she once feared, she had discovered a family. And perhaps, in time, something even more tender.